Thanks for joining me on episode 1264 of the Inspired Stewardship Podcast.
I'm Ryan Engelstad from Pop Psych 101. I encourage you to find health, and one way to be inspired to do that is by listening to this, the Inspired Stewardship Podcast, with my friend, Scott Mater.
As I've talked about through this, the truth is mental health is vitally important. It causes physical health issues. It causes impacts on our ability to get things done. It causes impacts on our money. It causes impacts on our day-to-day life and our relationships. It affects every part of our life.
Welcome and thank you for joining us on the Inspired Stewardship Podcast. If you truly desire to become the person who God wants you to be, then you must learn to use your time, your talent, and your treasures for your true calling. In the Inspired Stewardship Podcast, you will learn to invest in yourself, invest in others, and develop your influence so that you can impact the world.
In today's episode about investing in others through stewarding your talent, I talk with you about what mental health really is. I share some of the myths about mental health, and I also share some of the reasons mental health is so important.
You've heard me talk about developing your talent, and one of the best ways to do that is through books. But if you're like most people today, it's hard to find the time to read, and that's why today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Go to inspiredstewardship.com/audible to sign up, and you can get a 30-day free trial. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from, and you can pick one and listen your way to developing your talents via Audible. That's inspiredstewardship.com/audible to get your free trial and listen to great books the same way you're listening to this podcast.
Johnny and I talked some about mental health this week, and yesterday I talked a little bit about mental health and productivity. And you could probably predict that tomorrow I'm going to talk a little bit about mental health and money. But today I just wanted to talk a little bit about mental health in general. Again, remember, I'm not a therapist. I'm not a diagnostician. I'm not here to diagnose anyone or to say that everyone has mental health problems. But I do think we built up a society where we don't always focus on our mental well-being as much as we do on our physical well-being. If we see somebody that has something going on physically in their life, we understand the need to accommodate and help that situation, but we often ignore it when it comes to mental health. Mental health, simply defined, includes the emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It's the part of our life that affects how we think, how we feel, and how we act. It also helps determine how we handle stress, how we relate to others and relationships, and how we make choices throughout our life. It's important at every stage of our life. It starts at young childhood, runs through our teenage years, and into adulthood as well. Mental health issues or concerns can come and go, or they can be constant throughout our lives. There are lots of factors that contribute to our mental health, including biology, our genes, our brain chemistry, how we're wired inside. And then our life experiences, including trauma and abuse, can affect it. And then, of course, the family history of mental health and addiction and other issues like that can have an effect on our life. And when you see these signs, when you begin to notice in your life things like eating or sleeping too much or too little, pulling away, withdrawing from people and activities that used to bring you good feelings and that you used to enjoy doing, having low or no energy, or feeling numb or nothing matters in our life, having unexplained physical aches and pains like headaches all of the time and this sort of thing. When you start to feel helpless or hopeless, or when you begin to medicate through smoking, drinking, or other sorts of activities in an addictive way, when you find yourself feeling unusually confused or forgetful or on edge, angry, upset, worried, or scared, when these sorts of things begin to pile up, these are all indicators that there may be something that you need to seek out help around your mental well-being, around your mental health, because something's going on. Mental health is one of those things that there are a ton of myths around. A lot of times we think to ourselves, our mental health, that doesn't affect me. And yet 1 in 5 Americans experience mental health issues. And I'm sure that those numbers are similar in other countries. This just happens to be the study that I found. 1 in 6 young people include major depressive episodes, and 1 in 20 Americans live with what would be considered a serious mental illness. Suicide is one of the leading causes of death in the United States, and in fact, that comes about in some cases through mental health issues. We often think as a myth that children can't have mental health issues, that this is something that's only true in teenagers and adults. And yet the truth is it can actually start showing up at a very young age. And if they get intercession and get treatment early, it can really help with their long-term mental and physical health. Another myth. A lot of times people think that the reason that we don't want to talk about mental health, and I don't want to admit to maybe having a mental health issue, is because, everyone who has mental health problems are violent, they're unpredictable, they commit crimes, they do other things that are bad. And yet the vast majority of people with mental health problems are no more likely to be violent than any other person in the world. Most people with mental illnesses are actually more likely to have violent crime perpetrated upon them than they are to attribute it and commit it themselves. It's roughly 3 to 5% of violent acts that are actually traced back to some sort of mental health issue. So it's, truth be told, it's actually not any sort of common thing. And again, truthfully, it's more likely to be done to them than by them. Yesterday, I talked about mental health and productivity. But the truth is that most people with mental health will hold down a job, be fully functional people and employees. And you probably know someone who's gotten treatment or is undergoing treatment for mental health and don't even realize it, because usually they're fully functional human beings around you. They're managing the mental health problem. They're actually able to deal with it because they're getting the help they need. And the last myth, we often think that somehow it's a weakness on that person's part. If they have a mental health issue, it's because they're personally weak or they have a character issue of some sort. I've actually heard people with mental health issues describe themselves in that way because that's how other people describe it. They say, I'm lazy or I'm weak or I just need to pull myself up by my bootstraps. And others will say that to them. And yet the truth is often it's caused by things that any person in that situation would have similar issues. As I've talked about through this, the truth is mental health is vitally important. It causes physical health issues. It causes impacts on our ability to get things done. It causes impacts on our money. It causes impacts on our day-to-day life and our relationships. It affects every part of our life. And that's why it's important that you take advantage of help if you need it. There are lots of things out there that can give you help. Simply search on Google for mental health treatments and resources, and you will find hundreds, whether that's the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, whether that's substance abuse and mental health services in your local county. You'll find things out there. And if you're not able to do that yourself, ask a friend or a family member to help you with it. But at the end of the day, get the help that you need. Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much for listening to the Inspired Stewardship podcast. As a subscriber and listener, we challenge you to not just sit back and passively listen, but act on what you've heard and find a way to live your calling. If you like this episode on the stewardship of talent, you can go over to inspiredstewardship.com/talent and sign up for our 5-week series on the stewardship of talent. Or if you're in the U.S., you can text 44222 talent tips. That's talent tips to 44222 and get those tips. Until next time, invest your time, your talent, and your treasures. Develop your influence and impact the world.